anyway, let's go ahead and get into the reason in which why we are here and continue on with some DC talk and talk about the latest episode of the DC Studios original series on HBO, The Penguin, which we've now gotten the second episode of this 8-episode limited series. Episode 2 is entitled Inside Man. And so I know we both had very, very positive things to say about the series premiere last week, and certainly eagerly anticipating how this story is going to continue over the next few weeks. We're going to dive into spoilers and talk about the details of the things that went down in this week's episode. But before we do that, just like to start off with some big picture general thoughts about what we took away from this week's episode. So I'll pass it over to you, man. What did you think about the latest episode of The Penguin?
This is another really good follow-up, I think, to episode 1 of, I think, what this show is supposed to be. In fact, this is almost like establishing what this show is, part 2, almost kind of. Part 1 was taking us through Oz's world and how he thinks and kind of what the show is going to be about. And this one is kind of establishing kind of those same ideas, but slightly moving the needle and be like, okay, no, but this is it. Now we're about to be in it. And I think whatever episode 3 entails is like, okay, now it's time to really and for sure get into the meat and potatoes. Kristen Milioti still was like one of my favorite characters in this whole thing. She really is like running the show for me. I still definitely love Colin Farrell as a Penguin. He's still, of course, at the heart and in middle of the show. It still really is about him. But anytime him and Miss Milioti is on stage or on screen together, it really is my favorite parts of the show when they do it so well, that it just keeps it going for me. This is another episode that has a ton of tension in it, a lot of things going on, and you're really trying to figure out what this character Oz is how he's going to get through these situations he's putting himself in. And so it's remaining interesting. It's remaining fun. It's remaining violent. It's a decent action sequence in this episode. And overall, man, I'm still here for it. It's another good episode, I'd say.
I like this follow up a lot, and I was not necessarily concerned, but interested to see how they were going to navigate this because episode 2s, after really, really positive and strong starts, can always be a little shaky. And I do think that this had its shaky moments. It wasn't the best for me. I found that sometimes it can become a little convoluted just due to the nature of the show. There's a lot of he said, she said. There's a lot of cover ups. There's a lot of lies on top of lies. And so we as an audience have to kind of keep track of that, of just everybody's movements and motives. But beyond that, this episode in particular had some really, really cool sequences. There was a really good action sequence around the middle of the episode, a great tension-filled sequence at the end of the episode in particular. Those things really wake you up and make you feel energized and get you excited. It's like, oh yeah, this show is like really, really cooking. Some of the stuff in between a little shaky here and there, and maybe could use a little bit more development and a little bit more nuance, I guess, in the writing, but those are pretty minor gripes for me. Overall, I still had a really, really great time. And ultimately, Colin Farrell, Kristen Milioti, they are just having so much fun, and their chemistry together, it just really leaps off the screen every time you see them in a scene together. And it just makes you wonder, like, how is this going to continue to develop and evolve, this relationship between these two, and how is it going to ultimately boil over? You know, what's going to be the breaking point between these two, because they are opposing forces. But as we I think often see in these types of worlds and these types of situations, people strike up alliances that they never necessarily predict, and all of a sudden we're getting some pretty dreamlike scenarios, people teaming up against each other, people betraying each other. That's just kind of the world of crime and drama in that way. So I think the show is still maintaining a good sense of momentum and a good sense of energy, I guess, as we just progress towards the rest of the season. So I enjoyed it overall. But with all of that said, let's get into this week's episode, talk about the details. If you've not seen it, spoiler warning, go watch it and come back and finish out the rest of our conversation. And first, where I want to start off is just really with Kristen Milioti and Sophia Falcone here. One of the big questions we had last week was, hey, why did she end up in Arkham? They didn't really explain that. They didn't really unpack that. Obviously, there's some bad stuff underneath the surface there. And really the way that this episode kicks off is kind of unpacking a little bit of that. And we see that Sophia is still dealing with a ton of trauma, of course, due to the death of her brother, Alberto, but I think also just this sense that she is in a sense kind of running from her past almost, right? And I think throughout the course of this episode, we start to peel back that orange a little bit more to find out, like, well, who is she? What did she do? What's going on inside of her head? And so there's this crazy dream sequence at the top of the episode where she's having a conversation with her brother, but he's killed right in front of her very eyes. That obviously creates a lot of anxiety for her. And we see that she is actually sitting in her therapist's office, kind of talking about everything that went down and ultimately her intention to avenge her brother's death. But also later in the episode, you know, one of the key scenes is her riding in the back of a car, and we're hearing about the reports of the Hangman, which is this
Mm-hmm.
alter ego that people know her as. Sophia Falcone is known as the Hangman, and the reason that she was locked up in Arkham is because she murdered multiple women. You know, she is very much
Yep.
responsible for killing a variety of women, that caused her to be locked up in Arkham Asylum, though she is now out. What did you think about just those new developments, you know, of them unpacking her character, and just the trauma, you know, that she's experiencing because of what happened to her brother, but also just that this looming sense and this presence of her former life, I guess, her past life that
Mm-hmm.
she is seemingly trying to escape from.
Yeah, you know, it's always scary and tricky when a character doesn't feel safe anywhere. And she very much tells I forgot who she was talking to, but she very much tells him like, I am not safe. Oh yeah, the therapist. She very much tells him I am not safe. I'm at home, and the fact that those things aren't synonymous is so indicative of what she has gone through in the past, and even ways in which she ended up in Arkham. And now she does have to navigate a family who doesn't trust her, and nobody who really can trust, I think, the actions of what she does, because she ended up in there. Is very much the what happens when anybody gets incarcerated for a long period of time, right? You get out of jail and everyone's like, ooh, we love you, but we can only do so much. We have to have you on somewhat of a leash, or we can't trust you with everything. And so she's not only going through that, but she gets out and her brother's dead. How am I supposed to both figure out who killed my brother and not be trusted by the people to figure it out? It's just a very hard thing, I think, to go through for her. And as the Hangman, as she's known as, is just a whole slew of things that she's going under. And so this dream sequence where her brother being shot and her being in Arkham is just like, I can imagine how stressed a person could be in that situation. But what are you to do, right? And so it'll be interesting, I think, to see how she continues to navigate this trauma she has of being in Arkham, of her family not trusting her, but also dealing with her brother being dead in such a violent and gruesome way. Like, she screamed when she seen him at the end of episode 1 in that trunk. Like, it was a very traumatic thing for her, and I think she'll continue to go through, I guess, these episodes throughout the season.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed the stuff here. It just does so much, I think, to get us to relate to her a little bit more as an audience, just because, you know, when you first see her in the premiere episode, it's like, okay, she's really, really scary. You don't want to cross her path, but obviously there's much more humanity to her. There's reasons behind a lot of these things. And ultimately there are things I think, you know, we can kind of get behind as an audience. We can't obviously support murder and some of the more atrocious things that she's done, but
Mm-hmm.
one big key takeaway I think from this episode is just this battle for her to overtake the crime family, though she's not really being put in a position to do so. She's kind of being undermined at several different instances. Her legs are getting cut out from underneath her, and obviously it's a power grab too. There's multiple people who want to take over, and so she's not the only one vying for power, though she is probably the one who has the legitimate stake in the claim. But she's also a woman, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different levels and layers to it in which she's fighting this battle on multiple fronts, and of course adding on the death of her brother on top of that, and her not necessarily knowing who the killer is behind it, though we know it's Oz. That just creates a new level of distraction for her, and also just instability in her mind. You know, she probably would be a lot sharper and more focused in this whole thing if she didn't have to worry about this, and also could have the allegiance of her brother, probably one of the only people that she could actually trust. But now we're dealing with the whole trust thing, and you can't trust anybody, and there's rats and there's moles and all sorts of stuff. And so I just love that we got to dive a little bit more into that, and truly understand that. Plus this huge reputation that she has as the Hangman is just also a big thing that I do feel like she's at a crossroads and trying to establish a new life for herself and escape that former life and be something that's considered a little bit more legitimate, because just a
Mm-hmm.
crazed murderer who was locked up in a mental institution, nobody's really going to get behind that and support that. But as somebody who's a mob boss or a crime lord, there's an
Mm-hmm.
air of legitimacy there that she can ultimately have in her arsenal that you couldn't have otherwise. And so I thought it was pretty good stuff there that they did with Kristen Milioti. On the other hand, Oz, he's just in a pickle of playing all sides of the fence. Obviously,
Hmm.
he's ultimately, out for self, as we know and we expect, and ultimately he's going to do what he has to do to try to overtake the family. But he's trying to get in good graces on both sides. On one hand, we see him go to visit Maroney in prison once again. And they're trying to basically continue this partnership amongst each other. Though Maroney is very, very hesitant and doesn't want to do it, he ultimately agrees. And so he's going to work with Maroney's crew, but again, also operate as this quote unquote inside man and sort of play both sides when it benefits him or out of, I guess, just necessity for survival, against the
Hmm.
Falcons, because there's a big sequence in the middle of the episode, a big action sequence where they're gonna have this robbery or heist of one of the Falcons' truck shipments for a drop shipment. And basically, Oz could not have predicted that Johnny Vitti would show up. And Johnny Vitti's like, yeah, you get in the truck. You're going to go on the run here. And so
Oh
now
man.
he's caught in a pickle because he knows that the truck is going to get robbed. He might lose his life. And so he kind of panics, and basically it forces him to kill all of Falcone's henchmen on the truck in order just to survive and not blow his cover in that moment. So how did you feel about just like the setup to that whole moment? Because I think you can see like, okay, yeah, he's working the system here. He's doing it all right. He's playing both sides, but ultimately these things that are unpredictable, he can't map those out at this particular juncture yet, and it puts him in a very, very precarious position where he has to not only dig himself deeper into a hole, but also it becomes a more difficult climb towards the end of the
Hmm.
episode outside of that hole once he knows like, okay, there's multiple lies here and I have to figure out how to make it all make sense.
This is just such a dangerous position to be in the first place, or to even put yourself in. And what's funny is he keeps getting, I guess, this pressure from his mom to just be the best that he can be, and she's like, "You better go get it," kind of type thing. And this is him going to get it, is being this double agent for two of the most dangerous crime families in all of Gotham, with the Maronis on one hand and the Falcons on another hand. It's like, dude, why are you in this predicament and in this mess? And so it's so interesting watching him navigate all of this, because you don't know how any of it's going to go down, but because it's Oz, he is both smart enough and somewhat invisible enough to get away with a lot of this stuff. And I think a lot of times in this show, people underestimate him because of the way he looks. He has his waddle. People call him a penguin, and it's just like, he's not going to do anything. He's innocent, or he's only doing what he's told. And so it's really cool to see him, I think, play both sides, to be like, dang, y'all really don't know that this dude is doing this stuff. And it's been really fun, I think, to watch from his point of view and how he operates. And so when he gets on this truck and you don't know how it's going to go down, or what, or how it's going to survive, but he's going to survive. I think just a really cool thing that has to play out, that you have to see what's happening, man. It's really cool, I think, to watch Colin Farrell work in these moments too, because a lot of it is all eyes. Even in the Batman, the movie 2022, it was like he was doing a lot of acting with his eyes, and he's doing a lot here too. He's literally just looking at a rearview mirror like, dude, you were kind of killing this just with your eyes, being nervous, not knowing what to do next, or thinking. You can see him actively thinking what he's going to do. And so again, when he's in this predicament, the shipment happens, or the robbery tries to happen, and he has to kill some people, and he has to it's just really cool, I think, the way it all goes down.
Yeah, I mean, this is why you start to root for a character like this, because it's like, wow, he continues to find a way out of all these situations, although it appears like there's going to be no way out. Like, okay, maybe he has backed himself into a corner in which he cannot figure out a way to navigate, but he does time and time again, and it's really conniving and manipulative, but he has to be, considering the
Hmm.
circumstances and considering that, again, he's dug himself into a particular position in which it requires him to just kind of play all sides of the fence. He's already carrying probably the biggest lie of all, in the fact that he's covering up the fact that he killed Alberto. So now it's like, all right, let's handle this problem, and then let's handle this problem, and now we have to think quickly. But these things are really sharpening him, I think, in a way that you can't necessarily communicate off screen. We kind of have to see him in
Hmm.
these moments to know like, oh yeah, this is somebody legitimate who's very, very intelligent and can think about all of these scenarios moving forward, and he's only going to get better, and he's only going to become even more formidable once he does overtake everything, because to
Hmm.
go through real-time situations like this where you are putting your foot to the fire and you have to think quickly and your life is on the line, there's no better training, I guess, on the job to become a crime boss than this. And so we're seeing that happen in real time, and I love how they did all of that, and the action sequence itself was also really really well done too. It got you to, I think it got you to sort of wonder and believe, like, well, is he going to actually like kill these people, knowing that
Hmm.
that's the only resolution here. There's really no
That's
other
it.
way unless you just kill them and maintain your cover. And then he does, he does so, and all of that stuff looked really, really good. But speaking of his mother, I do want to touch on that really quickly. There's not a ton here with him and his mother, but one of the other things about the relationship is just like her dementia is it's getting worse, but Oz
Hmm.
is not going to get her any, I guess, legitimate care. He's basically paying for a caretaker to stay with her at this particular moment. And I do wonder what that is about. Like, why is he so? I guess why is he so stubborn about the fact of getting her more appropriate treatment for this condition that she has, that can certainly kill her. If it's not tended
Yeah.
to in the right ways, it can ultimately take her out. But there is another moment later in the episode where we get Oz talking to Sophia about his family and about his mother in
Hmm.
particular, and how they sort of dealt with the death of his brothers, and how his mom sort of, I don't want to say neglected, but they certainly chose what I would consider is more of a non-traditional way to honor somebody's passing. And they go to a club and dance, as opposed to like
Hmm.
really, I guess, being down in the dumps about it and really mourning. They kind of go in a different approach. So just want to ask your thoughts on, just again, that continuing relationship and how it develops between him and his mother, and just some of these things that he's dealing with, struggling to not get more appropriate care for her, but also some of those things that might be lingering from the past when he grew up with her, and some of that childhood experience that he might be carrying over into his current day experience with her.
Yeah, I think it's another one of those things that's just adding character beats to Oz and the way he operates. And in this show, I think there is going to be an important thing about ailments and mental health and just health in general, right? Almost every character we've touched so far either has something quote unquote wrong with them, or they're going through something that puts them in a mental state that's like, whoa, you're kind of messed up right now. You might need some assistance, with this thing. And it's been interesting to see the relationship between him and his mom, because like the whole dementia thing is, like you said, why aren't you getting help? But at the same time, it's like maybe if they bring it up or she gets some real help, then it makes it real. You know what I mean? Like maybe they don't want to do that or go through those actions to make it more than what it is. Also, as somebody like Oz, he wants to keep everything, I think, as in house as possible, because he's so involved with so many other things. As soon as mom starts getting help from an outside source, now she's vulnerable. Now his mom can be used for any kind of leverage at any point in time, and maybe he doesn't like that, and maybe that's too dangerous for him as something to be reckoned with. So it's a very interesting thing, because then even when you talk about, like you said, instead of having a traditional funeral, or they go dancing, it's like, oh, so we're just gonna kind of ignore this thing that happened by being happy about it and by celebrating in a different way. And so I think that's just the way that family has navigated for so long, kind of ignoring the sadness or the ailments or the things that's going on in their lives, and instead choosing to be more optimistic and positive about those situations. That's the way it seems to be right now. And I think, of course, not a super healthy way to go about it, but it seems to be the way they operate.
Yeah, it's clearly a lot more there. And there's reasons behind all of this that I'm sure we'll get to in the coming episodes. But it's interesting to see. I think he does seem to have a close kinship with his mother, but at the same time, there appears to be something there in which he might be somewhat resentful towards her. I mean, just look at the way that they act. It's all very unhealthy, I think, to say the least,
Hmm.
between their interactions with each other. Like, she is not, I guess, the most positive reinforcement that he probably has in his life, but then also he has like some sort of resentment towards her. There's a lot there, obviously stemming from childhood experiences, and I'm sure will come to the surface. But a lot of questions there that I think are appropriate to raise to get us to focus on that. And I think that we'll probably get, I wouldn't be surprised if we get like some actual true flashbacks too to what that
Hmm.
childhood might look like, and maybe some of the things that she might have done to him that ultimately
Hmm.
impacted and scarred him for life. So can't wait to see how that all unfolds. But as we get towards the end of the episode, lots going on here. Again, lies on top of lies, cover-ups on top of cover-ups. Basically, Oz does end up meeting Nadia, who is the wife of Maroni. She basically assigns him to go retrieve Irvide, so that they can extract information from him. Oz is ultimately able to sneak into the household of the Falcones, and he tries to, ultimately find Irvide. But basically, once he gets spotted and once he gets seen by Victor, he has to kill Irvide like immediately. He takes a switchblade and just offs him right then and there. And so that creates another sort of domino effect of like, now I might be caught red-handed, but he comes up with a quick thought and a quick plot to basically pin that murder on one of Sophia's enforcers, Castillo. He basically plants the knife on him, and ultimately, when there's this big sort of showdown at the end of the episode in which they're trying to figure out like who's the rat, who's the snitch here, who murdered him, they're all trying to figure it out. It's very, very tense. A lot of stuff going on. They find the switchblade in Castillo's pocket, and that ultimately cost him his life. And we see a moment where it looks like Sophia might actually try to shoot him, but Luca comes in and actually intervenes. He's the one to kill him, and does it with no hesitation. And so that also adds on another level of, oh, are you really ready for this? Are you really built for this life to be a leader, to make these really hard decisions in the heat of the moment when you need to? And then on the other side of that, Oz is, once again, he's able to find a way to manipulate his way through the situation and maintain his cover. How did you feel about all this unfolding? Because it was a lot going on. It felt like the odds were, consistently being stacked against Oz, and every moment in turn, it's like, oh, he's busted. That's it. That's the end of it. Okay. But no, he finds a way every time and again to come up with a new plan, as half thought out as it may be, but ultimately it does work out in his favor, and he's able to walk out this episode.
Okay, gonna waddle his way through. Okay, as he should. Man, what just so many crazy moments that were happening here. First and foremost, Vic not being able to put like the jewels in old boy's car was like, whoa, where do all these people come from? This dude is in trouble. What's happening here? He gets away, but like you said, for Oz to then have to cut Irvad in that heat of the moment it's so interesting because he did have to do that really fast, but that is also again like the probably one of the only ways out for him in that moment. So he doesn't talk, and all of this doesn't explode on him or implode on him. So it was crazy, I think, to see like in that moment he was so ruthless and just did what he had to do by killing Irvad. It was just like, whoa, I can't believe you did that fast. But also thinking of that fast, and I'm just constantly reminded how smart this dude is. Thinking about like this weird connection, like this dude knows Spanish. You know what I'm saying? I know it's random, but it's like, no, dude, you know Spanish, you understand Spanish. We even seen that in the Batman. You know Spanish. It's like, you are so smart, man. And so him thinking with his toes is it really is what's making the show interesting, because to be able to pin this on Castillo right after he saved him. He just saved him at the beginning of the episode by throwing him into the car. He said, "Come on, Castillo," and they got in the car and drove off. And here he is sacrificing him. What, 20 minutes, 25 minutes later? It's just really crazy, I think, to see how at any moment, a flip of a dime, things can turn, and now he has to sacrifice somebody that he just saved. It's really crazy, and it's all selfish, I think, at the end of the day. But the tension was high. I didn't know how it was going to go down, but once again, he found his way out, and Sophia believed everything that was happening. Can't believe it was Castillo. Like you said, Luca comes in and shoots him. It was a lot of pandemonium, but I think it was really cool how it played out.
Well, and because of that pandemonium, I mean, people's judgment, it's severely clouded, and I think in different circumstances, when people are not like dying left and right, bodies are not piling up, people can think a little bit more clearly. But again, in the heat of the moment, when stuff is just it's so much tension and so many emotions, it's kind of hard to see really what's true and what's false. And I think that Oz is able to leverage all of that, the chaos and the pandemonium, to basically buy himself another day, and it worked out in his favor. But you just got to think like these people aren't typically smarter than this, but again, the panic sets in, and it's really, really hard, and you have to make a decision almost right then and there. You can't let people leave out of the room, because this is the only time we're going to have everybody in the room, and somebody got to pay, because you got to know that you can't keep doing this and think you're going to get over. Whoever's the rat,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to snuff them out immediately, and they have to act very, very quickly, and doing so costs the life of Castillo, who we know obviously is not the rat. But man, I think it's just crazy how he's able to leverage the heat of the moment. But this show is continuing to call back to, I think, what's inspired it. We talked last week about the Sopranos inspiration. I noticed some Boardwalk Empire stuff in here. I think Oz was given big Walter White energy this week, with just like the levels of the manipulation that he has to build for himself, because that's very much what Walter White was doing in Breaking Bad. At a certain point, like once he got skilled enough, he can make anybody do anything he said, because he would just play the system and lie and just
Yep.
all sorts of stuff. And it's like, oh my God, you're the worst person, because we know that everything you're saying is just like flat out bullshit, but
Right.
it's ultimately going to serve you at the end of the day. And I think that's what was happening here with Oz in this particular episode. But all of this, really does cost Sophia in a pretty big way. And basically Luca decides, because like she doesn't necessarily seem equipped, to handle how things are going right now. She's going to be sent to Italy basically until all of this business is settled. And she's not going for that. She's like, okay, whatever. Like, I'm not doing that. And she still obviously wants to take over the crime family. But we're going to do a little bit of a pivot here. And the big ending of the episode is how she asks basically Oz to form this partnership to wipe out the Falcone family, so that she can ultimately step in and take control. And she sees Oz as an ally currently at the moment, because he's been able to figure all of this out, how to really pull the wool over our eyes, not knowing that he himself is the one who wants to take over. And so that obviously will have to come to a head. But how did you feel about this momentary partnership, because it won't last forever, but this momentary partnership that might strike up, and we're now sort of living out that saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's kind of how they have to move in the next few episodes in order to really assume power. How do you feel about this impending alliance that's developing between Sophia and Oz?
Yeah, I love it. It's gonna make everything, I think, so much more interesting, with Oz being as close to her as possible. Because now, I guess now more than ever, eyes are going to be on him. And this is going to be a lot of things that he's not going to be able, I think, I guess, to manipulate and hide from as much, or at least not in the same way as he has been these first two episodes. Now it's like, no, we're in this together. We have to operate this together. And to see how Oz is going to, I guess, try to do things behind her back is going to be very interesting. I'm really curious to see how that's going to play out, especially how this, even though she feels like maybe her brother has now been, I guess, avenged, right? She's looking for justice. That's what she said. She's like, what? That's all you care about is the shipment? I care about justice. And I think part of her maybe thinks that she did get that justice, but I think that this whole thing is going to be looming over the entire season, that the person next to you, your partner, is the person that killed your brother. And so to see how that plays out, and maybe some small details start to unravel accidentally, even though Oz thinks this is all packaged well, it's going to be interesting, man. I can't wait to see, how they either butt heads, and in some ways how they work together. Because I think a Falcone and Penguin, I think they're gonna find some cool ways to actually also make good partners as well. So to see how that falling out is going to be interesting.
And I think from a character standpoint, it doesn't appear so on the surface, but they have a lot in common. Like I talked about earlier with Sophia and just some of the things that she's battling from a perception standpoint. Oz battles a lot of that same stuff. Nobody takes him seriously. He does get called names. He has, physical deficiencies and things of that nature, physical handicaps, so to say. And I think that they both have been operating as outcasts, and she's been away. She's been locked up. He has been rising in the ranks, but again, only seen to a certain level. And so now joining forces, it's this new generation of thinkers, this new generation of organized crime bosses who want to disrupt the system and overtake, I think, these aging gangsters that should probably be on their way out. This is typical stuff that you see with mob stories and mob families, how the new generation has to step up. But they have to take it from the former generation. You can't be given the keys to the kingdom. You have to take it away. You have to show that sense of ruthlessness. You have to show what you're willing to do to basically, I think, command the attention and respect of all of your peers and the people that are going to be following up behind you. And so I love the fact that they are leaning into the idea that, like, hey, these two, they do have a lot in common. They have a shared purpose together for the time being. We know it's going to implode eventually, but right now it makes sense to team them up and create this I guess this unholy alliance, because
Mm,
they both are sick and they both
yeah.
are quick to murder if they have to. That's one thing that we know about them both, that they have no hesitation within really killing people and wiping them out if it requires them to do so. Before we wrap up here, any other thoughts or any other takeaways or any other moments that you want to highlight from this week's episode of The Penguin before we move on to Agatha?
I think I want them to do more with Vic. Perhaps I think the concept of Vic makes sense, but in some of these episodes, I think I'm missing the connection that him and Penguin are supposed to be making, with him and Oz are supposed to be making completely. And I think they might get into that stuff a little bit later. But for right now, I'm just like, this is okay. Like, I understand why he's here and what he's doing, but I think I want a little bit more from that relationship and exactly why he's here. And again, they seem to be hinting at things. He got called from somebody in this episode. It's like, okay, what is really happening with you, dude? And they even, of course, allude to the loss of his family, to the Riddler and the floods and all of that stuff. I think all of that stuff is interesting, but I think I want them to hammer home exactly why Vic is in this show for real, for real. And I don't think they got there yet, but I think they might.
Yeah, and they're also already setting up, I think, the possible dissension between him and Oz. There's that
Hmm.
moment when Oz makes him, dig the grave for the bodies of Ervad and Castillo, and as he's digging the grave, he's like, "Yo, you need to get on top of your game, stay focused, or you'll be down there with them." So
Hmm.
he's quickly reminding him, like, "Hey, kid, like I'm pulling you along and I'm taking you under my wing, but don't get it twisted. This can all end immediately if it has to. I have no problem or hesitation in sacrificing you and killing you if it requires my own survival." And we did see Vic kind of slip up here in the episode, so he has to
Yeah.
reinforce, like, yo, get it together. Don't make mistakes like that again. So I do anticipate we'll see Vic sharpen his skills, but what does that look like again at the end of this? Like, does Vic ultimately, sort of rise up in the ranks and really truly become the right hand of Oz as he
Hmm.
ultimately takes over, or does he do something that's so consequential that Oz has to ultimately get rid of him? I feel like it's going to be the latter, and I feel like we have to be reminded of the fact that this is not necessarily a character to root for, and so
Right.
what better way to communicate that idea than us falling in love, I guess, with this character in Vic,
Hmm.
and then ultimately him being wiped out by the very person who spared his life initially to begin with. Who we thought he had something in common with, who it felt like he could trust, but ultimately, it didn't come out that way. So we'll see. But I definitely I think that there will be more to come with Vic. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on episode 2 of the DC Studios and HBO series The Penguin. If you've checked out this latest episode, hit us up and let us know what you think about it.